Evolutionary psychology does not contradict religion. In fact, they go hand in hand. Understanding the spiritual side of things does not negate the effects of the relationship between the psychological and the physiological. Or to put it simply, man is a spirit that has a soul that lives in a body. So to pay attention to the spiritual without understanding how the body works is to be willfully ignorant. Some of the best examples of that willful ignorance come from the Bible itself, and my favorite being the story of King David. See, at this point in time, King David was the anointed king of Israel, a throne that he had inherited from King Saul. And on a random evening after waking up from a quick power nap, he decided to go up to the roof of his palace to chill and contemplate. This is when his wandering eyes caught a glimpse of something or someone that would change the course of his life forever. Bathsheba. David happened to have come out to stretch his legs on his rooftop around the same time Bathsheba was taking a bath in her compound. King David could not get enough of this chick. He thought she was so fine, so he made inquiries of her. David's people were like, "My lord, that's Bathsheba, that's Uriah's wife and the daughter of Eliam." And you would think at this point, after finding out that she's married, David would back off, right? No, she was on his mind heavy. And clearly at this point, he was growing tired of just creeping on her from the rooftop, so he decided he wanted a more immersive experience. He asked his people to arrange a meeting with her, and they did. Now, given the story so far, the most powerful man in the land summons a woman to his chambers. What do you think happened next? If you're thinking they had relations, you have a dirty mind. And you're also correct. They ain't called him King David, the slayer of 10,000 for nothing, you feel me? Now, after that little rendezvous David and Bathsheba had, the letter delivered privately to him to his chambers from Bathsheba. And the letter pretty much said, "Hey David, I'm with child." Clearly, this is something David can't have. It would not only ruin his reputation and undermine his authority, but call his decision-making into question. So he began to come up with an evil plan. You see, Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, was actually a ranked officer in David's army. And he was currently in the battlefield fighting a war in the name of King David to breach enemy walls. So David is like, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll just call Uriah back to take a break from his war efforts to sleep with his wife. That way, he'll think the pregnancy is his. He sends word to the battlefield to have them summon Uriah and a few other officers to not make it look too suspicious. He asks Uriah about the war efforts, what's going on at the front lines, how the enemy is faring, stuff like that. Just things to pass the time, things that ultimately don't matter. Then he thanks Uriah for all his service, commends him for all the war efforts, and tells him to go back home. Smooth plan so far, right? On top of that, King David has some of his most trusted servants deliver gifts and presents to Uriah's house just to seal the deal. That could have also been King David's guilty conscience getting the better of him, but I digress. Regardless, having gifts sent to Uriah's house was a class move, but there was just one problem. When the servants got to Uriah's house, gifts in hand, he wasn't home. King David was shocked when his people gave him the news because what the hell happened? The plan was going well up to that point. So again, he summoned Uriah before him and was like, "Yo, what happened? Why didn't you make it home last night? I had my people send you mad gifts for your loyal service to the kingdom. Why weren't you there to receive them?" So Uriah told King David where he was the night before. It turns out that Uriah, being the duty-bound ranked officer that he was, didn't see it fit to go home and sleep in his bed. Especially not when he still had brothers in arms fighting at the front lines, and a few of his fellow ranked officers keeping watch at the gates of David's palace. So instead of sleep at home comfortable with his wife, he decided he would sleep on the mats at the gates of the palace with his brothers in arms. I for one commend him. He was simply abiding by the bro code. Bros before hoes. Now clearly this isn't what David wanted to hear because it was getting in the way of pinning Bathsheba's pregnancy on Uriah. Plus, King David was running out of time here. Uriah had just one day left to spend in Israel before going back to rejoin the war efforts on the battlefield. David decided to double down on the plan by inviting Uriah to have dinner with him and all his wives. And yes, you heard that right, wives. David had multiple wives he had inherited from the previous king, King Saul. Just to put in context just how greedy this man was for getting with Bathsheba, but back to the story. King David thought to himself, after eating to his fill and getting drunk, there's no way Uriah wouldn't be missing the warm embrace of his wife. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very well and 10 being extremely well, better than expected, how well do you think this plan worked? That was a trick question. It didn't work at all. Duty-bound Uriah had yet again opted to sleep at the palace gates with his brothers in arms. Do you understand how duty-bound you have to be to the point where even alcohol can't sway you from the mission? That's very impressive. Needless to say though, King David was not impressed when he got the report of Uriah's whereabouts from the last night. In fact, he was furious. He was officially out of time to pin the pregnancy on Uriah, and any further delays or extensions of Uriah's time in Israel would just make him look more suspicious. In his rage and desperation, he came up with one last plan, a Hail Mary attempt to save face. He wrote out detailed instructions to his trusted army general Joab, who was also Uriah's commanding officer, and gave it to Uriah the next morning to be delivered to Joab when he gets to the battlefield. The ever-dutiful Uriah took the candle-sealed written instructions and made a promise to David that on his life he would deliver them to Joab, his commanding officer. Then he rode all the way back to the battlefield to deliver said instructions. poor Uriah. If only he knew that that message he was carrying was his own death certificate. Because King David had written a lot more than just words of encouragement in those sealed instructions. Remember those enemy walls that I was telling you about before, the ones that David's army was currently in a battle with? Well, it turns out that enemy or that country in question wasn't just known for, at the time, their amazing defensive wall, but also their long-range attack capabilities, especially their archery. And these skilled archers made it particularly difficult to get close to the walls, much less breach them. So it was a well-known rule, unless you're going in the dead of the night where the archer's visibility isn't all the way there, don't get close to the walls. Which is why David instructed Joab to put Uriah at the front line so he can be as close to the wall as possible without getting the chance to retreat. You know how they say third time's a charm? Well, it turns out David's third plan worked flawlessly. Uriah had fallen by the hands and arrows of the enemy. And upon the news of Uriah's death, David makes Bathsheba his latest wife. Much further down the line, they end up having a son together, and his name is King Solomon. Now, what are the things we can learn from this tragic story? Well, there are many, but the most important one being that even a man that was referred to in the Bible as a man after God's own heart was completely savage and ruthless in the optimization of his own evolutionary strategy. Even though he already had an abundance of wives, aka access to replication value from multiple women, he did not hesitate to further increase his chances of replication by impregnating another man's wife. He even went out of his way to abuse his position of authority and power to perform paternity fraud. And then when that didn't work, he further abused his power to use his enemies to eliminate his competition. Just a perfect example of ruthless evolutionary strategies for survival and replication at play. So please understand that while man may be spirit, evolutionary psychology rules our bodies. And we should all be learning not how to suppress our evolutionary functions in psychology, but to use them for our own betterment and improvement. The mind and body don't have to be at war with each other. They can work harmoniously. It's been Jace the Favorite Scientist. Do with this information what you must.